This is a CBS News special report. Here's CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite.
A woman fired a shot at President Ford in San Francisco this afternoon, but a policeman deflected the pistol and the president was not hit. The woman was in a crowd across the street about 35 or 40 feet away as the president was leaving the St. Francis Hotel to enter his limousine to return to Washington. Witnesses heard the sound and saw a puff of smoke. The woman, identified by police as Sarah Jean Moore, in her 40s, was immediately seized. When the shot was fired, the president was shoved into his car and whisked to the airport, where Air Force One was waiting to fly him to Washington. He was not hurt, and at the airport appeared calm and unperturbed. Now, with more details in San Francisco, here's our White House correspondent, Bob Schieffer.
Here we go. Good evening. To bring you up to date on what has happened here, President Ford is now en route back to Washington aboard Air Force One. He was not injured this afternoon, but someone did take a shot at him as he emerged from the St. Francis Hotel in downtown San Francisco. Mr. Ford was hustled into his limousine and taken directly to the airport. The plane took off about a half hour or so ago from San Francisco and is now en route back to Washington. A 40-year-old woman who has been identified as Sarah Moore of San Francisco has been arrested by police. Police Sergeant Jim Wynn says she fired a shot with a .38 pistol at Mr. Ford, standing about 40 feet from him, but she missed. Here is some film of the incident. This film taken just after the shot rang out in downtown San Francisco, and as you can see, Secret Service agents and police are moving in. There's a lot of confusion now. No one is really sure, as this film is being taken, just what has happened. Witnesses said the president seemed to double over after the shot was fired. Someone at first thought that he had been hit. Then it appeared he was just taking protective action, and the Secret Service was pushing him on into his car. Press Secretary Ron Nessen later confirmed that Mr. Ford had not been injured. So that's official. Mr. Ford was not hurt during this incident. The police at first said a man had been arrested, and in fact several people were taken into custody. Police apparently just arrested suspicious people as they saw them right after this happened. But Police Sergeant Jim Wynn said he saw Sarah Moore, the 40-year-old woman, fire the shot with what appeared to be a .38 caliber pistol. One of the witnesses who saw it and heard it said it was not an expensive weapon from the sound of it. It was just a cheap one. CBS News correspondent Richard Threlkeld, who for the last year or so has been covering the Patty Hearst story out here on the West Coast, knows Sarah Moore, came to know her during coverage of that trial. Richard, tell us about it.
Bob, it's strange how sometimes news stories become very personal stories and how, oddly enough, one big story tends to run into another, but it certainly happened in this case. This reporter's known Sarah Jane Moore, who police have identified as the woman accused of firing that pistol, known her for more than a year and a half. She is a nice, quiet, 40-year-old, middle-class, white divorcee with a small child who lives in San Francisco's East Bay near Berkeley, leading a nice, quiet, middle-class life until one day in March of 1974 when Patty Hearst had been kidnapped and Randolph Hearst started the People in Need program, a $2 million effort to feed poor people to answer the ransom demands of the Symbionese Liberation Army. Sarah Jane Moore walked into the Hearst Corporation offices off the street and volunteered to help. Over time, she struck up a close relationship with Mr. and Mrs. Hearst, Patty's ex-fiancé Stephen Weed, acting as a kind of liaison with the various minority groups who made up the coalition administering People in Need. She was bookkeeper and public relations lady, which is how many of the press got to know her, and spent many a weekend with her child at the Hearst Mansion in Hillsborough, joining that long vigil with the family, waiting for phone calls and messages from the kidnappers. When Patty Hearst renounced her family and joined the SLA, the People in Need program ended, and Sarah Jane Moore took some odd jobs, but the whole experience had changed her life. She'd seen the other people, she'd been around the street, talked to people she'd never known before, various social classes, minorities, about things she'd never talked about before with anyone. Later on, she took to spending a lot of time in various Berkeley coffee houses talking to young people. Later on, I saw her at a demonstration outside one of the hotels. I think it was during President Rockefeller's, Vice President Rockefeller's visit. She was with one of the local prison aid groups. I haven't seen her in some months. She's called me a few times, and I haven't had a chance to talk to her because you get busy. And thinking about it now, I wish very much I had talked to her about it.
Dick, in the time that you knew her and would talk to her during that story, did you ever get any indication at all that she was a person of a violent turn, that something like this might come about?
Absolutely not. She was. She is the total antithesis of that. She's quiet. She tends to get very committed to things, to talk about things a great deal, very open mind to new ideas. But even during the times that she had joined various groups and started talking with people on the left, she was really not talking with what you'd call very radical, terrorist radical SLA people. And it was more, I think, in her mind. You had never any indication that what she was thinking would be translated into action. She's not that kind of person, or it didn't seem so.
What a bizarre development this is. Just less than 3 weeks ago, President Ford, threat made on his life by a person closely connected with the Manson case, one of the big stories, and now a person involved in the big story, the Hearst case. Well, that's it. And repeating once again, President Ford was not hurt. He is all right en route back to Washington. The woman is under arrest and is being questioned here in San Francisco. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, San Francisco.
Yes, it was just 17 days ago in Sacramento that a young woman pointed a pistol at President Ford from just an arm's length away, but that weapon did not fire. And then in St. Louis 10 days ago, police spotted but did not catch a man with a pistol in the building where President Ford was to speak just a little later. Now today, a shot was fired at President Ford in San Francisco. But, as we have reported, it did not hit the president. He is safe and on his way to Washington tonight. CBS News will broadcast a special report on the assassination attempt at 11:30 tonight, Eastern Time.
This has been a CBS News special report. This is CBS.
Let's go. Hey!
My God, there's been a shot. There's been a shot.
Stay back! Stay back! Get up on the sidewalk!
We're being pushed back by the police. Somebody has fired a shot here. We don't know if anybody's been hit. My God. Somebody fired a shot.
Special report. Presidential assassination. Another attempt. Sponsored by Buffrin, the headache tablet with special ingredients to give you fast relief and be easy on your stomach. Here is CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. As most of you know, there was an attempt on the life of President Ford in San Francisco today. The second time in 17 days that his life has been directly endangered. Again today, the president escaped unhurt. This latest attempt, allegedly by 45-year-old Sarah Jean Moore, who was standing across the street from the president as he was leaving the St. Francis Hotel, occurred at 3:39 this afternoon, San Francisco time. In the next half hour, we will review the day's events with a look at that scene in San Francisco again. We expect to see a few minutes from now, live, the president's arrival in Washington, and perhaps hear a few words from him. A CBS correspondent who knows the woman being held for today's shooting will give us an intimate picture of her, and we may see her arraignment on the charge of attempting to kill the President of the United States. He's just arrived in Washington. He's there at the airport, as you see, on a rainy night in the nation's capital. Let's go to the White House correspondent who perhaps is standing by there. Can he come in? Jed Duvall?
Yes, Walter. Just as this program began, Walter, indeed, as we were hearing the tape of the panicky sounds and the shot from San Francisco at that moment, the door was opening here to the president's plane, and aides snapped those clear umbrellas that you can see up to protect the president and Mrs. Ford from the heavy drizzle that until 20 minutes ago was a real downpour here at Andrews Air Force Base. And the president and his wife came slowly down the steps and have gone straight to the helicopter without stopping to talk to any of us, to White House aides, and the helicopter is now warming up for the very short trip to the White House lawn. Walter?
There was some suggestion, Jed Duvall, that perhaps the president would have a word when he reached the White House. Have you had any more details on that?
All we got here, Walter, was some runway rumor, I guess you'd call it, that there was a 5% chance he'd stop and talk to us. We don't know what it's going to be. Now, the last time that this happened, 17 days ago, we were out here about this hour of the night, and the president, there was no rain. The president spoke for quite a few minutes with some of the Secret Service officials and chatted a long time there at the foot of that same helicopter at the same time of night, and then flew to the White House, where he did stop and talk to reporters.
Thank you, Jed. We've seen the president, apparently calm as he arrived in Washington. Now let's take a look at those earlier events. Let's go to White House correspondent Bob Schieffer, who has stayed behind in San Francisco to give us this report.
The president had been in the hotel to make a speech and tape an interview with some San Francisco television newsmen. He had just told an aide that the interview had gone well. It was the last event on his schedule during this 4-day swing through California, and he was in a relaxed mood as he left the hotel. About 3,000 people had gathered along the street where Mr. Ford's bulletproof limousine had been parked. The president waved to the crowds, and they had cheered him, and that's when it happened. A shot rang out. At first it appeared Mr. Ford had been hit, but he was not injured and had just ducked as Secret Service agents hustled him into the limousine. The shot had come from across the street no more than 40 feet away. In the confusion of the moment, witnesses first said the pistol had been fired by a man, but officers later said the shot had come from a pistol held by Sarah Jane Moore, who had been dressed in men's clothing. She was quickly hustled away. The bullet ricocheted off a taxi and struck the driver a glancing blow, but the spent slug caused only a minor scratch. The cabbie recovered it and gave it to police. The motorcade went on directly to the airport, and within a half hour, the president was airborne and en route back to Washington. Mrs. Ford had spent the day in Monterey, south of San Francisco. She learned about the incident from Mr. Ford when she joined him at the plane. Mr. Ford went through his usual routine of shaking hands at the airport with the airport police before boarding Air Force One. His spokesman, Ron Nesson, told reporters that the president was relaxed about the entire episode. But others who saw the president shortly after the incident said that he did indeed appear momentarily shaken, as might be expected. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, San Francisco.
That motorcade raced through the downtown San Francisco, sometimes at speeds above 60 miles an hour. A police helicopter flew overhead, and 18 police motorcycles cleared the freeway ahead of the president. The motorcade made the 15-mile trip to the airport in 17 minutes. It drove onto the airport tarmac and went directly to Air Force One, which quickly took off 15 minutes ahead of schedule. The White House is not revealing Mr. Ford's future travel plans, but he had been planning in the coming weeks to make trips to Michigan, Florida, Ohio, New Jersey, North Carolina, West Virginia, Georgia, and Alabama.
Confused about which pain reliever to take? Laboratory studies compared 2 tablet doses of Bufferin, Bayer, and Anacin. On the average, in 10 minutes, Bufferin put 3 grains in the bloodstream, Bayer and Anacin less than 2. In 15, note Bufferin superiority. In 20, Bufferin 5.5, Bayer and Anacin 3.5 and less. Take Bufferin. It's easy on the stomach, and it put much more pain reliever in the bloodstream sooner.
Most of the time I run around in blue jeans, but sometimes I like to dress romantically. And on those nights especially, I want my hair to look soft and silky. And I want the color to have a healthy shine. That's why I like Nice and Easy. It's got the conditioners I want, and the color looks so natural. It lets me be me. I guess that's why Nice and Easy is the best-selling hair color.
This latest attempt on President Ford's life has sparked new calls for stiff gun control and an investigation of the Secret Service. Connie Chung has the Washington reaction.
Rockefeller was hosting a housewarming party at the new official vice presidential residence when he learned of the shooting. He called this second assassination attempt doubly tragic, but he said President Ford was doubly blessed by escaping injury. He was asked if he thinks the president should curtail his public appearances.
Well, I don't see how a democracy can surrender its freedom and its liberty and its ability to move and its leaders to go to the people. Well, we've lost the basic forces and factors that are significant in the free land.
Well, of course, the more publicity these people get, the more it attracts other people who may be a little unbalanced to Sir, do you see any way of limiting the number of handguns that are around that all these people seem to have? A lot of people working on it, but I don't know how you do.
Philip Buchan, White House counsel and close friend of the president, expressed shock.
I'm appalled that it should happen again so soon. I've been one of the... I had a theory that one incident wouldn't trigger another this quickly, but apparently I've been proved wrong by this event. And I'm just flabbergasted, really, and very concerned as a result.
The reaction from Capitol Hill amounted to calls for gun control.
I think my first reaction was to the fact that, again, we have guns used in an attempt to assassinate a president, and that we have no control over these objects in our society, besides all the shock that comes from it.
Well, do you think this will help encourage the House to push stronger gun control legislation?
I wish that I could promise that, and yet when I view the rather desultory record that we have compiled on gun legislation in the last few years, I wonder if it wouldn't almost take the impetus of another assassination before we were shocked into taking some action that would be more definitive than what we've taken in the past.
Should there be an investigation of security procedures followed by the Secret Service?
Yes, I believe I would favor that. I find it incredible that early reports indicate that a woman who had 13 live rounds of ammunition in her purse and a gun, which was confiscated, was nevertheless released at a time when the president was known to be in the city.
I think the president is going out too much and exposing himself too much.
Oh, I do, definitely. I don't think that this is necessary for him to be out in the hustings the way he is. I do know that the organizations need some uplift, and I think that it's good, of course, that he is able to make this contact with people, but I just think it's too risky today, and I think that people would appreciate him staying here in Washington more and leaving the business of providing more incentive to the Republican organizations and to the people of the country at large to perhaps the vice president or someone else who might not be as ready a target for these persons who seem to be intent on destroying President Ford.
Several members of Congress, including Senate Republican leader Hugh Scott, also urged Mr. Ford and other candidates for the presidency to limit what Scott called random handshaking and events of that kind. Scott called on Congress to consider additional security measures for next year's national campaigns.
Peace, quiet, fresh salt air. You'd never think anyone who lives in this little town would have trouble falling asleep.
Living here, living anywhere. Sometimes you just can't get to sleep. That's why I take Sominex.
Sominex helps me relax and feel drowsy, so I can get the sleep I need.
Everyone has trouble falling asleep once in a while. Me, I take Sominex.
Sominex. It helps take the trouble out of falling asleep.
In this month's earlier assassination attempt, September 5th, the assailant turned out to be connected with the infamous Charles Manson family. And now it develops there's a bizarre connection between the second would-be presidential assassin and another well-known crime story, the Hearst kidnapping. Richard Threlkeld profiles Sarah Moore.
Everyone who has known Sarah Jane Moore well, and that includes this correspondent and a lot of other journalists in San Francisco, remembers her as a chatty, inquisitive, white middle-class woman, a 40-year-old divorcee with a small child, who went through the looking glass from her comfortable world a year and a half ago into a radically different world of leftists, militant minorities, and angry ex-convicts when she became involved with the Patty Hearst case. She was volunteer bookkeeper for the People in Need program, the free food giveaway begun in an effort to meet the ransom demands for Patty Hearst's release. In the process, she became acquainted with Mr. and Mrs. Randolph Hearst, Patty's parents, and became a sort of liaison between the Hearsts and the various activist groups who were running People in Need. After Patty joined her kidnappers, Sarah Jane Moore was drawn more and more into the counterculture. She joined a prisoners' relief group. Last June, one of the underground papers here printed an article accusing her of having been a part-time FBI informant during her early months in People in Need. This cost her her friendships with her new friends in the counterculture and tormented her. She attempted suicide at least once during her marriage and at times was said to have a violent temper. But much of that runs counter to those who have known her, who know that she was afraid of guns and afraid of violence. And that's why, for her friends, it is hard to imagine that yesterday police and the Secret Service picked up and questioned Sarah Jane Moore as part of a routine security check, a check of people considered possible threats to the president, that they confiscated a handgun and some bullets from Sarah Jane Moore and then simply released her. Richard Threlkeld, CBS News, San Francisco.
They said they released her because in California it's a felony offense to possess brass knuckles, ice picks, and blackjacks, but not an unloaded gun. Some biographical details on Mrs. Moore. Born in Charleston, West Virginia, May 21st, 1930. That makes her 45. She's 5 feet 6, 130 pounds, short blonde hair, has a 9-year-old son. She's also known as Sarah Jane Alberg. In Washington, Eric Severide standing by in our studio there. Eric, we've had another one of those days which blackens our history, certainly. We've got the Secret Service computerized lists of people considered a threat to the president. They say they've got 50,000 on that list. Sarah Moore was talked to by them last night. This Fromme, who tried to assassinate the president earlier this month, or pointed a gun at him at any rate, also was presumably had a militant history and was not caught. Where do we go from here in protecting the president?
Well, in this town, there are going to be 3 lines of reaction, I would think. One, to restrict the president's activities of this kind. In spite of what Vice President Rockefeller just said, it is not basic to our system of government that a president has to mingle with the crowds in this fashion. The second will be another push, however fruitless, toward gun control. The third will be the talk of congressional investigation of Secret Service equipment and procedures and stratagems and so on. There's a growing feeling, of course, and this has been true since the Fromme incident 17 days ago, that the president has a duty not to mingle with crowds in this fashion, given our recent history. It's not even necessary for election purposes. He can contact a very small percentage of the voters. At the least, it's quite obvious, if he keeps on this way, the crowds are going to get bigger, many of them just people of a ghoulish and morbid curiosity, really secretly hoping to see something happen. The press party accompanying the presidents will get bigger and will have to press in closer. The tension will be there every minute for everybody. This is something different from the Kennedy period. It's not a matter of individual sick male egos resenting the rich and powerful and attractive like the Kennedys. This is an attack on the office, on the presidency, not on Gerald Ford as a person. This one and the Fromme episode of 2.5 weeks ago. I suppose there may be an effort for congressional investigation of Secret Service. I don't know what it can solve unless we change our basic laws about preventive detention and that sort of thing. There is a Fourth Amendment, protects persons and people in their persons as well as their homes, or unless they stretch the meaning of it, preventive arrest or detention is a pretty serious thing, as if because somebody appears unstable. Maybe preventive surveillance will have to be done. It would take a lot of people in the Secret Service to do that if a president's to travel. Another danger of an investigation like that, of course, is it could reveal a lot of the techniques, tactics, and stratagems of the Secret Service that probably ought to be kept secret. There's no God-given or constitutional right of everybody in the country knowing everything in that area. To know, for example, that the president's been wearing a bulletproof vest. It's perfectly legal to publish it, but it's the height of folly. I don't know, Walter. Obviously something has to give. The feeling here is 3 strikes and out. And I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be something.
Eric, if President Ford insists on appearing in large crowds, is there anyone, the Secret Service or anyone else, who could overrule him?
Congress could, I would think.
Birch Bayh, Senator Birch Bayh, and Senator John Stennis, Birch Bayh, a possible presidential seeker himself, presidential candidate, feel that coverage of assassination attempts inspires further attempts by publicity seekers. Would you give that any credence?
Well, I think it does. It's a contagion that starts, like a lot of student riots in the 60s, various things. Things do go by contagion, but they cannot be kept secret from the people. An attempt on a president's life, it's got to be. People are entitled to know that, of course.
It'd be far worse, wouldn't it, if we attempted to keep such a thing secret and the story spread by rumors? It certainly would.
It'd be much worse, much worse. There's no element here that we know of yet of conspiracy. The Fromme woman was associated with a group in the background, and perhaps this woman was too. But we don't have conspiracy yet. We haven't really had established conspiracy in these affairs since the Puerto Rican attempt on Harry Truman. That was long ago. But conspiracy will be looked for by the police, certainly very hard.
And we've got another problem immediately facing us, of course, haven't we, Eric? Because even given the imperfect protection provided to President, it's better than nothing, certainly. And yet now we face a presidential campaign in which many candidates are going to be in the field. How in the world can the Secret Service protect them all?
I don't see how they do. One thing about this, it will nail in, I would think, Teddy Kennedy's determination not to run. He can't do it.
Thank you, Eric. In just 17 days, here's President Ford at the White House now. You see him with Mrs. Rockefeller and Mrs. Ford. Let's listen.
Very especially most grateful that the Vice President and Mrs. Rockefeller has met us. We talked to our four children, and they're not happy with how we're all right. But let me say most emphatically, I thank the Secret Service for doing a super job again. They really were tremendous in things that they did that were necessary. But equally, let me express my appreciation for the fine job that the San Francisco Police Force did. They were tremendous. Those that were associated with them because they had the help of others. But the most important thing is that I don't think any person, president, or any person in any other major political office are to cower in the face of a limited number of people out of 214 million Americans who want to take the law into their own hands. The American people expect, and I approve of it, in fact I think it's right, want a dialogue between them and their president and other public officials. And if we can't have that opportunity of talking with one another, seeing one another, shaking hands with one another, something has gone wrong in our society. I don't think these individuals who want to destroy our society and tear up our fabric of relationships represent America. The American people are good people. Democrats, independents, Republicans, and others. Under no circumstance will I, and I hope no others, capitulate to those that want to undercut what's all good in America. The American people are strong, they're good, and they will reflect the leadership that comes from the people in public office. And the leadership must likewise be strong and good. And I'm confident whether that leadership is Democratic or Republican, will be good and will be strong. That's the way America give the leadership to the world, which is special. Wonderful to be home. Good to see our family. Good to see the Vice President. Mrs. Rockefeller. I think it's important that we don't capitulate to the wrong element, a limited number.
It clearly is a very sobered President Ford who arrives back in Washington tonight, as you saw him there at the White House just upon his arrival. But just barely 5.5 hours after that latest attempt on his life, he is still maintaining that the president must go out to meet the people. But in just 17 days, there have been 2 attempts on the life of the president and 2 other incidents causing concern for his safety. On September 5th, Lynette Squeaky Fromme, a member of the Charles Manson family, pointed a gun at Mr. Ford in Sacramento as he stood just 4 or 5 feet away. She didn't get a chance to fire that gun. On September 12th in St. Louis, a policeman in Kiel Auditorium saw a man with a gun a couple of hours before the president was to speak there. He gave chase but lost the man in a parking lot or garage. And then today, just before the shooting incident itself, a man identified as 24-year-old Ronald Carlo was charged with threatening the president in a note he tried to deliver to his hotel. Not long before today's shooting, just shortly before it, Mr. Ford was interviewed at CBS affiliate KPIX-TV in San Francisco about the Carlo and Fromme incidents.
There are reports that a man was arrested and booked today here in San Francisco on suspicion of threatening you, and also following your own close brush with death in Sacramento a couple weeks ago. I wonder if this has convinced you at all that we need tough gun control legislation in this country, or are public officials going to have to travel across the country with bulletproof vests and a prayer?
I did recommend to the Congress early this year a rather comprehensive approach to crime control, a new proposal that would make it much more difficult for individuals to get what we call Saturday night specials, which are the cheap handguns that are used extensively for illegal purposes. In addition, I propose to the Congress that we have much more severe penalties for a person using a gun in the commission of some other crime, and for mandatory sentences in order to get people who use guns in the process of committing a crime or alleged crime. It seems to me that that approach is far, far better than the approach of some people who recommend that gun owners should be registered and that handguns and long guns ought to be registered. I prefer to go after the person who uses the gun for an illegal or criminal purpose. That, to me, is a far better approach than the one where you require registration of the individual or the gun.
Just minutes after making those statements, Gerald Ford walked into the street and heard the sound of gunfire. Our White House correspondents, Bob Schieffer and Robert Pierpoint, were there. They're now in our San Francisco studios. Gentlemen, what was the first you knew of the incident? I'll let you play it yourself. Bob Pierpoint or Bob Schieffer?
Well, Walter, I was on my way out to the motorcade to join it, and I got to the door and realized the motorcade had left a little early. I saw the last of the officers who were following it disappear down the street. I walked out and said, "What happened?" They said, several people said it sounded like someone shot a gun. I walked up to the nearest police officer and said, "Is that true, officer? Did someone shoot?" He said, "Yes, I think someone shot at the president." I said, "Was he all right?" The officer said, "I think so. I don't think anyone was hurt." At that moment, a man walked up to the same officer and said,
What?
"Officer, this fell from me," and he said it hit me and then fell on the ground, and he showed us fragments of a bullet.
That man, Bob Pierpoint, has been identified as an ex-Marine on 100% disability named Oliver Sipple, 33 years old. No, that's not the man who was hit. Excuse me. Oliver Sipple was the man who saw the chrome-plated gun and knocked it to the ground, or knocked it down so that the shot hit the street instead of the president or one of his party. Oliver Sipple was the man who knocked down the gun. The man who was just slightly injured, he's taken to the hospital, but I believe was released immediately thereafter with a very minor wound, was a 41-year-old cab driver.
That was the taxi driver. That bullet apparently, Walter, deflected either off his taxi or off the pavement and just gave him a little scratch. He, like a lot of people, was a very lucky fellow tonight.
Have either of you fellows had a chance to see Oliver Sipple? Has he been around at all, the hero Marine?
We have not had a chance to talk to him, Walter. All we know is that he may have saved the president's life.
What do you gentlemen who follow the president regularly, make nearly all the trips with him, know the problems that the Secret Service has, and obviously they're severe problems, But what do you think? Could anything more be done than is being done today to guard the president?
Walter, I tell you, I really wish I had something very wise to say right now, but there just really isn't very much to say. As this demonstrates, I suppose there's still a lot of crazy people in the world. You can have all this security, but a person who's willing to get out there and take a chance on giving his own life can still pose a threat to the president. I don't think there's any way that you can ever stop that. On the other hand, I don't think the president can stop going out among the people, so I don't know what you do about it.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Not since the assassination of President John F. Kennedy almost 12 years ago has a shot been fired at an American president. Not, that is, until today in San Francisco at the conclusion of a day that the president said he thought had gone well. A woman allegedly fired a .38 caliber pistol at him. An alert bystander saw her, hit the woman's arm, and deflected the shot. The president was not injured. So once again, this nation has narrowly escaped the tragedy, the trauma of assassination of our president. Above all else, this points out the need for some additional measures, some additional precautions to protect the life of the highest elected official in the country. As was noted earlier in this broadcast, will it take another assassination in our lifetime to finally force some action? This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
This has been a CBS News special report. Presidential assassination, another attempt. These reports are sponsored on a continuing basis by the maker of Buffrin and Endust. This is CBS.